already today, so that's good. We have some great speakers today, so we're just going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to share my screen so we can go through the agenda. Can everybody see the agenda? Okay, thank you. So with our partnership with Teaching and Learning at ESD 113, we have Alicia and Elise here that will be talking about Inclusive Practices Project and any other updates from the world of teaching and learning that they would like us to know about. And then we have Dan Steele from WASA that will give us a legislative update, budget updates, answer all of our burning questions. After that, April and I will be talking about budget extensions, non-high reporting, getting into the budget process and reminders, and just kind of get us in that mind frame of it's starting to be budget season. Dawn is here from CRISC to give us updates and everything in their world. And then we'll have some time for noteworthy items and information sharing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen. And Elise and Alicia, you are up. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Julie. I'll go ahead and start us off with just a couple of brief things that I mentioned to Julie. I want to get onto your calendars next year for the school year, because I think that you're all booked for the rest of this year. But just a couple heads up things to be watching for one is the dyslexia law, which starts next year, this upcoming fall, which requires school districts to screen kids in K-1-2 for indicators of and weaknesses associated with dyslexia. And it does specify that they can use LAP funds to do that. So I know that that's something that's going through OSPI right now. We've been trying to get funds for you, but hasn't always worked. Another one is the disproportionality. We've been having lots of conversations with that at the special ed department, and hoping to try to just kind of raise awareness, because if a school district does get a letter about disproportionality and you get into significant disproportionality, you are required to use 15% of your special education funds for preventative measures. And so a lot of districts want to stay out of significant dispro so that they aren't being told what to do with their funds. So one of the ways that we can contribute to equity for all is through an inclusive practices project. And that is what we're here to talk about today, is what we've been doing, what Elise has been fantastically doing for our region in regards to inclusive practices, and where we hope to continue that work. So Elise, do you want to share screen and take it over?
I sure will. My name is Elise Belanger Bailey, and I have had the privilege of serving at the ESD since February of 2020. So I was in the office for all of about, 6 weeks? So there we go. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Good. All right, can everybody see my screen? It should say on the road to equity. Excellent, excellent. So here's a little bit of background information for you. What is it and what is the need for it? So it was discovered through research and everything that Washington State is in the lowest quintile for inclusion nationwide, with 57% of students with disabilities included in the general settings for 80 to 100% of the school day. So in the fall of 2019, 175 schools and 85 districts were granted an allocation of the $25 million that the state legislature gave to OSPI, and ESD 113's allocation of that was $76,000. And the goal was to achieve full inclusion for 60% of students receiving SPED services by spring of 2021. And I am very, very pleased to announce that we have met that goal. Woohoo! The goal for ESD 113 was 14 schools. We exceeded that with 17 schools. And I have several new schools that are actually joining the project today. Starting today, actually, the day. So some of the activities we've been doing synchronous and asynchronous professional development with 12 individual models covering a very wide range of topics related to inclusionary practices such as equity, the myth of average, variability, family communication, involvement, theory and philosophy, lesson implementation, etc. And we also have huge resource banks. We have, and one of the things that we offer that we're most proud of is customized PD to meet the specific needs of specific schools and districts across the state. And coaching and mentoring for all teaching and staff and administrators. I am a former public school principal and head of school and director of student services. So I can speak both teacher and administrative. So what has happened so far? We've been allocated our 76,000. We have delivered 62 sessions, average of 15 to 300 people per session. The participants wish to continue. I have surveyed all of the schools with whom I am serving, and all of them want to continue next year because they're finding benefits already. Additional districts wish to join. As I told you, today we're welcoming Chehalis and Shelton along with us. And here's the big part, in June, the funding runs out. So what are we going to do about this? Oh, by the way, here are the schools that have joined us already. Yelm, Hood, Griffin, Pioneer, North River. And these are joining. Shelton is 3 schools, Chehalis, 1 more. So I should cross that out because today they officially decided, and the Lewis County Cooperative. So you can see we're really spreading across the whole ESD. COVID, if nothing else, has revealed the deep flaws and inequities in our traditional methods, and we have a unique opportunity here to address those issues. And our solution is one-on-one mentoring for superintendents, district and site levels administrator from myself, and continuing professional development and support through comprehensive and customizable menu of options. So such things as lesson planning, and I go and I do observations, I do model teaching, I make PD for the whole staff, I help reach out to parents, I do one-on-one mentoring with any administrative. And districts, depending on where they are in this process, can choose their level of service and where they are, so a fee for service. So the project will support and further the mission and goals of ESD 113, as you can see, to ensure excellent, equitable education for all students through service and collaborative. And our goals are to close the gaps, grow people, influence change, and eradicate racism. And thank you for listening. I very much appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you.
At this point, Julie, I know we did not use our whole time, but if there are questions for either Elise or myself, we are happy to engage in a little bit of a conversation with any of you, and all of you.
I am not seeing anything in the chat, but we have your information here. And if you want to send this to me, I can send it out to the group afterwards and they can contact you with any questions.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Julie. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good meeting, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good day. All righty. So now we have, before you get going, Dan, we have Justin from Olympia School District, who just jumped up to the top of my screen. So sorry about that. That is our new president-elect for WASBO for next year. And Justin wants to talk about that a little bit. So go ahead.
Well, thanks for the announcement, Julie. I just wasn't expecting that. I'm not officially yet. You know, There could be one of you that jumped to the top and beat me in that election process. So I'm happy to have competition at all times. But the bigger problem is no one has volunteered from our region to be the board representative. And so I am here begging all of you, and if it takes me coming to your building and filling out the application, I will do that. We need a representative for the WASBO board. It is a really fun group, and I have to say, WASBO has changed so much, and we're doing so many things. And one of the biggest projects we're working on are what's called just-in-time training, and that's 5 to 7 minute videos that there's over 600 of them that we're designing that can help. Hey, when I need to do my F-196, what does that look like? Or what does reporting to DRS look like? All of those little videos, and then we can reference them with each other, and we can send them to our employees, and it's a quick 5 to 7 minute little blurb. And I just am thankful to be a part of that team. The mentorship program is going well. It is huge. Matter of fact, I'm jumping off of this to get on a meeting with that, but WASBO's doing great things, and we need a board representative for ESD 113. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It is a 4-day commitment for the retreat, and then basically 1 day a month for our board meeting. And then, of course, at conference, you get to be one of those people that are really busy. But Kim did it so gracefully for so many years, and I stepped in and tried to fill those shoes, but it's been really difficult. But there's so many great changes. So if you're interested, please reach out to me, or the application's online. We really need to get someone that's interested, that wants to be there and help continue to grow WASBO and our professional development. So thanks for the time, Julie. I really appreciate it. Thanks, April. Thanks, Jody. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. So I hope this stirs up some interest from somebody to step up and be on that WASBO board. So thanks, Justin. All righty, Dan Steele, are you all set to go? Thank you so much for being here and keeping us updated on everything that's going on.
All ready to go. So let me share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I sent the PowerPoint to Julie earlier. So I presume you will post that somewhere or disseminate that to folks. Is that correct, Julie?
Yep, I will after this meeting. Then I'll send all the materials out to everyone. Okay,
great. So there's a handful of slides that I'll just kind of breeze through pretty quickly. And so you don't necessarily have to take notes or anything, because you'll have the PowerPoint afterwards. So, you know, a couple of months ago when Julie asked me to do this, the anticipation was that the legislative session was going to be done, or at least the major issues were going to be wrapped up. Of course, they are not done. And so there still are some question marks hanging out there with some pretty major puzzle pieces. So I'll answer any questions you have as best that I can, but we don't have solid answers on some things. So let me just jump in. And by the way, you know, when I was here a couple of months ago, walked through all the details of the session process and elections and kind of the laying the land, that sort of thing. Assume you don't need that, because most of you were here before. So I'm just going to jump right into the actual meat of the presentation. So first of all, I'd like to make sure everybody's on the same page where we are in the session. We are close to the end, but obviously the legislature likes to do a lot of the major things at the very end of the session. So today is day 93 of 105. The starting April 11th, which was Sunday, through the remainder of the session, we're in, this isn't the official name, but I call it the reconciliation phase. The only thing the legislature is actually allowed to do is deal with the budget bills that are actually implementing the budget, or differences between bills between the houses. And I think most of you know, but in order for a bill to become law, it has to actually pass the House and the Senate in the exact same form. So if the House introduces a bill, passes it, sends it to the Senate, they amend it, it has to actually go back to the House to actually be reconciled. So that's the process really for 2 weeks during this period. And again, what I call the reconciliation phase. And so that's what's going on right now. Just to give you a big picture, bills introduced this session were about 1,500. That's an awful lot of bills, but compared to a normal long session, it's actually fairly down. There'd be normally about 2,200 or 2,300 bills introduced. So there was a pretty significant drop off in the number of bills that were introduced, and certainly the number of bills that were heard and acted upon. As of today, there's about 140 bills that still are alive, moving through the process as a part of that reconciliation or concurrence process. In addition to those budget implementing bills, what they call in Olympia, the necessary to implement the budget. There's still a handful of those on top of that 140 number. And then the number of bills passed as of today is 128 sitting on the governor's desk. Handful of them have already been signed. A bunch of others are going to be signed soon. And then again, April 25th, day 105, sine die, that's the last day of session. There are still some question marks about whether or not they're going to be able to finish on time. I think they're going to be, but you know, what happens in the next week or so in terms of budget negotiations is really going to determine whether or not they can leave in 105 days or not. So certainly the budget for the legislature, but also for K-12 education is a huge deal. In fact, those 1,500 bills that were introduced, technically the only thing the legislature is actually obligated to do every year is adopt a 2-year budget. So if they adopted a 2-year budget and didn't do anything else, they would actually meet their obligations. But obviously legislators are politicians, so they want to actually introduce all those bills and get their voice heard. So I just want to walk through the budget, some of the details, but more of the overview. Senate Bill 5092 is the vehicle for the operating budget. And that's both the 21-23 operating budget, the 2-year budget that starts July 1st, but it also includes the 2021 supplemental budget, which runs through June 30th. This bill passed the Senate April 1st. It was essentially a party line vote. There was one conservative Democrat, Mark Mollett, out of Issaquah, who actually jumped and voted with the Republicans to vote no. But all of the Republicans voted no, and all of the Democrats, with the exception of Mollett, voted yes. Same thing occurred a couple of days later in the House. They actually adopted it on a straight party line vote, all Democrats supporting, all Republicans opposing. So this budget now, the negotiators have actually come together informally, formally probably behind the scenes, but we're not seeing what they're doing, but they're behind closed doors actually negotiating a final compromise budget. And again, a budget bill is the same thing as a regular bill that has to actually pass the House and the Senate in the same form. So these two bills are completely different. And so they have to come together and actually finalize a final budget. Capital budget, just really quickly, Senate Bill 5083 is the Senate version, passed at the end of March, unanimous, 49-0. They also have a bond bill, which hasn't moved yet. I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then House Bill 1080, a couple of days later, April 2nd, the House adopted their bill, again, 98-0 on their side of the issue. And again, those two bond bills have not yet moved. And the reason for that is they're going to have to wait for negotiations to find a final compromise capital budget. And once they do that, they'll know how much money they need in terms of bonds. And so then they'll actually pass the bond issue to go alongside that. So you can see the operating budget, very partisan. The capital budget, very nonpartisan or bipartisan. So it usually happens this way, but it's interesting just to note. So that's the only thing I'll talk about in terms of capital budget, unless folks have questions. But operating budget is the bigger deal. And so you see side by side the Senate version of the budget and the House version of the budget. And without even looking at all of the details, you can see pretty quickly that there are different versions. There's a number of issues that one side doesn't fund at all. There's a number of issues where the numbers are different. And so these issues are going to have to be the things that the legislators and negotiators have to come together and actually reconcile and decide what their final option is. Just big picture, the Senate overall budget spends about $1.5 billion more than the House budget does. So you've got that wiggle room as well. So just want to, I'm not going to walk through all of these issues unless folks have questions, but I just want to mention a couple of the highlights, some of the keys. And I'm sure most of you as budgeteers have looked at least the surface level of these issues. So this shouldn't be new news for all of you. But the first three areas up there, you can see the transportation and enrollment stabilization, which has been one of our major priorities this session that we've really been pushing hard on. And you can see not only are the numbers different between the House and the Senate, the actual policies and implementation of these issues are drastically different. And so this is really becoming a problem for legislators behind the scenes as they deal with this. So the pupil transportation stabilization is pretty close to what we need. Talk about this in more detail in a little bit, but that's a positive thing. The enrollment funding is probably a little bit down from what we're actually wanting and needing, but it's actually positive they actually provided this amount. What the Senate has done is a little bit different in terms of a implementation than the House. The Senate actually provides for $1,500 per student as a floor. So if you take your federal ESSER dollars and you receive less than that 1,500, the state will come in and actually supplement that to get you up to that $1,500 per student. So for example, if your ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, your federal funds, you've got $1,000 per student, the state will come in under this plan and provide a $500 check for you per student. So you actually get, again, to that $1,500 floor. The House on their part does something completely different. They actually provide money just essentially based off of enrollments from 2019-20. And you can see a significantly lower number, which we don't think is enough. And also it's important to note that $53 million, whether it's the right number or not, all of that money is coming from federal dollars. So what the Senate does is actually provide some state funds and uses federal funds. The House uses all federal funds, no state funds whatsoever. They also have in the House this additional learning day. The original version of the bill provided money, $280 million, for all school districts with a requirement to have an additional 5 learning days. As the bill went through the process in the Appropriations Committee, they actually backed off that a little bit. There's still the same $280 million in the budget, but the additional 5 learning days is one of your options. It's not required. You can also hire part-time staff to actually do some social emotional learning, and there's a handful of other things in terms of professional development and that sort of thing. So it's actually become just a chunk of change that we can actually use for learning recovery and other assorted things, as opposed to, again, that full 5 days. And obviously the concern, you know full well, that even though these 5 days would be fully funded, when you have those days, you have locally funded folks that you'd have to actually pay money out of your own levy dollars. And so it's actually good that they backed off that requirement. The next issue, the learning loss or learning recovery, has been one of the major issues the entire session, continues to be a big deal. The federal government thinks this is a big deal, provided a lot of money specifically for learning recovery issues. And you can see the numbers again are very different. In fact, even if the numbers were exactly the same, as you actually walk through the budget, the actual implementation areas are completely different. One side does a summer learning program, the other side does an after-school program, another one does outdoor, the other side does professional development or whatever the case may be. So even if the numbers were correct, lined up, they'd still have to deal with actually what the individual issues are. And then the last thing in terms of the big picture issues is that ESSER set aside. This is money, remember, that when the federal government provided those ESSER dollars, there was 10% of those dollars that went to the state education agency, OSPI in our case. And so those monies, what the legislature is doing is taking that and actually providing individual pieces, requirements for OSPI to use those funds to do. In fact, they shouldn't be upset about that because they've actually requested that. So the House actually did what OSPI has requested. you can see the Senate provides nothing in additional ESSER set-asides. And that's another issue that they're going to have to wrestle with. So I'm not going to walk through the rest of the issues, but I do want to mention two things specifically. Counselors, you remember last year in the supplemental budget, there was a provision for additional counselors in high poverty schools. The governor vetoed that because of the oncoming pandemic. So what the Senate provides is essentially the same thing that was in the budget last year that got vetoed. The House has the same thing, except for instead of just elementary schools, they provide additional counselors for all three levels, elementary, middle, and high school. So again, that's a positive thing. Social emotional learning, mental health issues, those things have been pretty prevalent and will continue to be for a while. So having additional counselors is a positive thing. And then the last thing here, paraeducator training, again, last year, again, the legislature actually provided the additional dollars for the additional paraeducator training days. Again, the governor vetoed it because of the oncoming pandemic. He's trying to find money to save, and so vetoed that. So now we're back to where we should have been last year in terms of the paraeducator training. So there's probably some other additional details you want to chat about, and we can certainly take questions as we go along. So I would just want to mention this piece, and I'm not going to walk through every single detail of this, but this is how the budget essentially is built. And one of the major concerns, if you look up to the top, lines 4, 5, and 9, we had enrollment declines and we had losses in transportation because of ridership, because there was declining enrollment and schools were closed. What both the House and Senate have actually done with those reductions, those maintenance level reductions, is they actually book them in the budget. They actually take the savings, which we think is really unfortunate. If the start of the session, we saw these maintenance level issues and we asked the legislature to say, hey, just give us that money back. But what they've actually done is taken that savings and actually booked it. The enrollment savings, as I mentioned, the $53 million that the House provides is not in here because this is just strictly state funding. And then you drop down to transportation, you can see the transportation, the Senate provides a pretty healthy amount of transportation stabilization to backfill those losses that you have. The House, on the other hand, again, using some federal dollars, and it's not very much. So these are major concerns for us. That third box, the ESSER stabilization smoothing, that's that $1,500 per day, or excuse me, $1,500 per student that the Senate included in there. So instead of doing it up in the enrollment stabilization box, they dropped it down and put it as a part of this smoothing effort. You can see the differences in learning recovery and a few other things down below. But if you drop down to the bottom and actually look at the bottom line, the literal bottom line, the state is actually saving in line 21 a pretty significant amount of maintenance level dollars, again, because of enrollment reductions and in pupil transportation ridership losses because schools were closed or the enrollment declines. You can see what the state funding is actually providing. A fairly similar amount in terms of billions of dollars, $258 million in the Senate side, $320 million on the House side. But if you actually add those to the bottom line of what the supplemental or what the savings is, you can see the bottom line is not very much. And so when legislators tell you that K-12 education is a paramount duty and the first priority of the state, I would actually question whether or not they believe that for this particular budget. Just want to show you one additional thing kind of side by side with the state funding versus the federal funding. And you can see the ESSER 2 and 3 funding for both the supplemental side as well as the biennial side. Again, the $53 million that the House provides for enrollment stabilization is a part of the federal funds and a handful of other things. So if you actually add those together, you can see that, again, not a whole lot of additional funding coming from the state. It's really unfortunate. We think the state actually needs to actually provide additional state dollars for K-12 education. and let the ESSER dollars from the federal government go to the school districts in a way that the Congress actually intended. But I'll get into that in a little bit. So just some issues that have come up. Even though the budgets haven't been completed yet, there are some things that we know are going to happen unless there's some sort of catastrophic mess in the next 10 days. The first thing is the IPD. We know, those of you who are keeping track of things, the House and the Senate had different numbers. They've actually come together now with our going through the process. IPD for 2021-22 is 2%. For the following year is 1.6%. So those of you who are working on those numbers, now we have those as pretty solid numbers. The second year of the biennium may actually change, but that won't change until next year. So as you're doing your planning, you can look at 2% and 1.6%. The minimum salary allocations have been set. The left-hand column is the current school year for the minimum salary allocations coming to school districts in terms of all three areas, the certificated, classified, and certificated administrators. And you can see the increases in the next 2 years. Again, the minimum salary that they're providing as the state. Additionally, the maintenance level fringe benefits as well as the incremental fringe benefits. For the first time in a long time, you can see the current year and then the next 2 years have actually dropped. It's the first time that I can ever remember this has actually happened. But it again is a little bit different. So as you're doing your budgets, you have these numbers set aside. Some of the additional things, the school employee benefit board rates have been adjusted. The current year is $1,000 per employee per month. This next upcoming school year is going to drop to about $968. And then following that, it jumps back up over that $1,000 to $1,032. Again, these are dollars that are coming from the state to you, but obviously for your locally funded folks, this is what you have to pick up on their behalf. National board bonus, the current year is a little under $5,600. The inflationary number that jumps up for the next couple of years. And then substitute teacher allocations has stayed the same as it has been for the last several years. It's 4 days per classroom teacher unit, and the rate continues to be a little under $152. And I know a lot of districts actually provide more than that using levy dollars, but what you're funded from the state is that same $152 that's been in place. Actually, I want to say at least the last 4 or 5, 6 years. We continue to ask to that be increased, but not a whole lot of movement there. So those are 2 pages that we actually know the details. Again, unless there's some sort of catastrophic event in the next 10 days or we're not anticipating, those are pretty solid wrapped up. So I want to talk about the education stabilization. Again, the enrollment and transportation stabilization, which have been our priorities, both WASA and WASBO this entire session. And actually well before session, we started talking to legislators about these issues. House Bill 1476 was the original version of the bill for enrollment stabilization. It actually started out talking about using the 2019-20 enrollment numbers for 2020-21 and 2021-22. That all of that issue got dropped out and is actually put in the budget. What's left in this bill is just levy capacity. Levy capacity is one of the issues that actually can't be dealt with in the budget. It has to be a statutory change. And so you can see here that it revises the levy formulas for the calendar year 2022 using the 2019-20 school year enrollments in place of the current year enrollments, if in fact 2019-20 is actually greater. Originally, it had 2022 and 2023, a 2-year look, but amendments as it went through the process actually got dropped out for just a 1-year advancement. It also requires school districts to be open for in-person instruction beginning this next school year. There's a definition of what that means. I believe it's 40% of your students in in-person opportunity. But we think starting 21-22, Not all schools are going to be in 100%, but we assume that most schools are going to actually be ongoing and trying to bring back some normalcy. House Bill 1476, just with the levy capacity, has actually passed the Senate. It's a part of that concurrence list that the House and Senate are actually reconciling differences currently. So our budget request in terms of the enrollment stabilization is really to go back to what they originally talked about in the House Bill 1476, to use the 2019-20 school district enrollments to drive the fiscal year 22 general apportionment, as well as all of the enrollment-based programs that you actually receive money for. The Learning Assistance Program, special education, highly capable learning assistance, local effort assistance, skill centers, and a few other things. We're really concerned about these issues because if you have an actual enrollment decline, not only will your general apportionment be hit, all of these other programs that are based off of enrollment are also going to be reduced, and you're not going to have the funds that you need to actually support your students. So in addition to that, what we're looking for in simple terms is the language from the original House Bill 1476. That language is actually a part of the House budget. It's absent in the Senate budget. The other major issue, pupil transportation. Senate Bill 5128 was the original version of the bill was going through that would have provided additional resources. Took a wild ride. It's been amended multiple times. What it now deals with specifically is just that flexibility to actually provide expanded services, specifically delivering meals, delivering instruction materials, and technology or electronic devices, as well as transporting students to learning centers where education or other support issues are provided. One of the amendments that was adopted is actually that last piece, providing transportation to students for interscholastic activities. That wasn't a part of the original version. And you remember, this is essentially the same language that was in the proclamation from the governor last August. And so it's actually taking that language from the proclamation, putting it here in statute. This bill, with just this limited amount of issues, the flexibility has actually passed the House. Again, it's on the concurrence list that the House and Senate are actually negotiating. So the budget requests that we have for pupil transportation stabilization, first of all, we need a mechanism for OSPI to be able to calculate your transportation allocations using the 2019-20 enrollments to provide for the 21-22 school year. As I mentioned, there's no dollars in the House budget. There's about $350 million in the Senate budget. But without this language to provide a mechanism for OSPI to actually calculate this, we can't actually access that money. So it's very clear that we need that language in there. We're also asking for Senate Bill 5128 to actually be adopted so we can actually have that flexibility to provide those expanded services. And certainly given the 350 versus 0, we're certainly supporting the Senate level and asking for support at least that $350 million to make sure that we actually do some actual stabilization. I should also mention, I think most of you know, but both the House and the Senate for the transportation stabilization as well as the enrollment stabilization require school districts to use their ESSER dollars to backfill those issues first. And then if there's still a remainder of a backfill, the state will come in and provide you the stabilization money. We don't think that's a good thing. We would actually rather the state come in and fulfill their obligations. So bill action, just want to walk through, I'm not going to walk through all the details. You have this in the PowerPoint you can look at yourself. And these bills obviously are going to be changing over the next 10 days. But a handful of bills that are actually have passed the opposite house. They're in this reconciliation process. The big one here is House Bill 1139, an issue that we've been fighting hard against for the last 3 or 4 years. It's as soon as the House and Senate agree on some language, this bill is going to pass, the governor's going to sign it. We're very concerned about number one, the threshold that actually triggers remediation requirements. is 5 parts per billion of lead in your water. We've been pushing really hard to say that the federal government, the EPA standard is 15 parts per billion, and it should be at least that. That was an uphill battle. Amendments were introduced, they were rejected. And so it's 5 parts per billion that will actually trigger remediation. We're also very concerned that it requires school districts to actually post information about the dangers of lead. And so the concern is you also have to post your lead results. So even though 5 parts per billion is a threshold, that if you're above that, you have to do some remediation, we're required to actually, number one, provide information to parents about and community about the dangers of lead and how it kills brain cells and, you know, all these other things. And we also have to post current results of lead tests. So even though 5 parts per billion is the threshold, if you actually do your testing and you show up at, say, 10 parts per billion, and you put that side by side with the dangers of lead, parents are going to freak, to put it bluntly. And so we're very concerned that even though there's not going to be required state level remediation, you're probably still going to have to do something in order to address the parents who are going to come out of the woodwork saying, I don't want my kid going to school because you've got lead in the water. The other issue that we have is that there's money in the Department of Health budget to do testing. There's money in the OSPI section of the budget for capital budget to actually provide funding to do this remediation. We think the money that's being provided is significantly well underfunded. So we've got very grave concerns about that. Last year, there was about $3 million provided for lead remediation. And just to give you an example, we have 295 districts, obviously. Tacoma, their remediation, it took them almost $1 million to do the remediation. So that takes 1/3 of what was actually available from the state. So again, we're very concerned that we don't think that there's going to be enough money to actually do what needs to be done. Legislators are actually saying, hey, don't worry about it. If there's not enough money, we'll take care of it next year. Well, next year is an interesting thing. One positive thing, and a side note, if you've been watching the what's going on in the federal government, the new American Jobs Plan from President Biden, another $2 trillion package, includes about $45 billion for lead remediation, specifically in schools and child care facilities. So hopefully we can access some of that money and actually deal with some of these issues as well. You also see that there's some unfunded mandates as a part of this program, and then a few other things here. One issue I want to mention on this, House Bill 1323. I know WASBO has been really active in this issue, and they've got a seminar or one of their webinars coming up, I think, in the next couple of days, dealing specifically with this issue, as well as long-term disability. There was a long-term care system that was established in law last year, and this bill actually talks about the implementation of it. And the original version of the bill, there's an opt-out option, but all state employees have to be a part of the system unless they opt out. And the concern we had about the opt-out is that in order to opt out, you have to actually show that you've provided your own long-term care with a private provider. And you have to actually do that before this bill actually is implemented. Presuming the governor signs this bill, and we're assuming he's going to, the bill will go into effect the end of July, which means from today until July, our school employees have that short a window to actually determine whether or not they're going to get their own insurance. And by the time we actually tell all of our employees, number one, you should think about this, and then they do all their research, we don't think there's enough time. Fortunately, there was an amendment that was adopted in the Senate, which hopefully the House will accept, that pushes that deadline out to November. Additionally, the Healthcare Authority is required to actually provide some research and information by October to actually get out to school employees as well as other state employees, walking through their options and what they can and can't do. So we think we were actually asking for a December date. November's not quite there, but it's actually a lot better than it was in July, given the fact that, again, a lot of employees aren't even going to be aware that this is a requirement. And the problem, if you don't opt out, you're locked into the system until you actually change jobs. So we were very concerned about that. Anyway, a horrible bill, looking like it's not going to be that bad of a bill. And a few other issues there that you can ask questions if you have them. The issues that are technically dead, and like to always talk about being technically dead, because until the session actually adjourns, all bills are able to be revived through various procedures. And the number one procedure, if they actually have a majority in the House and the Senate to actually have the votes to actually revive a bill, they can do it. Technically, they aren't allowed to, but you know, the majority rules. Just want to mention a couple of things here, specifically those bills in the italics. House Bill 1565, this is one of those bills that was actually dead before it got introduced because it was introduced after the cutoff, but it's one of the necessary to implement the budgets. It would actually provide a 1.5% COLA for TERS 1 and PERS 1 retirees. They haven't had a COLA for a while. So this is actually funding in the House budget. And the Senate doesn't include anything. So if the negotiators come together and ask for that COLA, this bill will pass. Senate Bill 5242 deals with media literacy for students. This bill is actually referenced in the Senate budget, so it's a priority. It may actually move. We're not sure if it's to the level of priority or not, but it is referenced in the Senate budget, so it actually may move. Senate Bill 5265 also is referenced in the budget, the Senate budget. This is another one of those recovery issues, allowing fifth year seniors to actually come back and essentially wipe out their first senior year. And so we're not sure if this is going to actually go very far with very many students utilizing this opportunity, but it is provided again in the Senate budget. So we're thinking that bill might actually move as well. And then 5453 is a bill that's probably not going to move, but I mention it specifically. This is actually taking the left one, which is the law enforcement and firefighters retirement fund, as well as TERS one, and it merges them together. I think most of you know that the TERS one has a huge unfunded liability that's going to take the state the next 15 or 20 years to actually pay off. And so what this would actually do is take LEF, which actually has a huge surplus, merge it with TERS that has a huge deficit, and it would actually come out eliminating that unfunded liability. But this bill isn't going to go anywhere. But the reason I mention it is the House actually includes $800 million in their budget, and also in anticipation of another $800 million next biennium to actually buy down the unfunded liability. This is a good thing for school districts because employers and employees have to actually pay a surcharge in their retirement accounts to actually buy down the unfunded liability. So if the state actually provides this $800 million this biennium and then another $800 million next biennium, it would wipe out that unfunded liability, and the surcharge that school districts and other employers are paying would actually be wiped out. So again, the bill's probably not going to go anywhere, but the issue dealing with the unfunded liabilities may actually be taken care of. These are the bills thus far from K-12 education. I mentioned, I think there was 128 bills that have actually gone to the governor's office. These lists of bills have gone for K-12 issues. Won't walk through any of these unless you have specific questions. We're concerned about some of them. Some of them we'll just have to deal with, but you've got the list of bills there. If you have any questions about any of them, be certainly willing to answer. So that's where I end. And I'm not sure, Julie, how much time I have for questions, but I'll take them for as long as you will give me the opportunity and as long as there are questions.
You have as long as there is, because you're the one that knows. I would rather the questions are going to you than me. So the floor is open to any to anybody that has any questions for Dan.
Question about IPD. IPD is the implicit price deflator. As a part of the McCleary solution, they actually changed the inflationary factor from CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to this implicit price deflator. So that's a number that is a national number as well as a state number. Those of you that watch the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, they actually develop using national numbers and state numbers, develop that IPD. So it's just the simple thing is that's the inflationary factor for salaries now. Oh, somebody actually answered the question right below it. I should have read the whole thing. So those are the only question it looks like in the chat box, but if anybody has anything else, if anybody wants to step up and be bold and ask a question that I can't answer. There's Cal Brody, he's probably got a tough one.
He does. He said, any clarification in 1085?
1085 is the
individual health plan for students.
yeah, that actually 1085 is actually a higher ed issue, I believe. Did I have that on my list, or are you pulling out of your own list?
It's on TWIO page 4 last Friday. First one on the list.
Really? Well,
Yeah, it seems to me that I haven't heard anything about this. So this is one of those times TWIO was great just to get that overall viewpoint. But
yeah.
they're talking about individual health plans for students with epilepsy or other seizure disorders. I'm scratching my head saying,
Oh,
are they expecting school districts to go out to the market and buy health plans for students? Seems well-intentioned, but kind of a weird little thing.
yeah. So, okay, so I was thinking of a different bill.
Do I get the Stump Dan Award, or are you going to have a good answer on this?
Yeah,
one?
so when you mention health plans, that's what confused me, because it's actually talking about students with seizure disorders, and you have to provide some services for them. I don't know all the details. It probably is going to be one of those unfunded mandates. It's essentially you have to deal with some policies to implement and to assist those kids. So I'll do some more research for you and get back to you. But I think it is a concerning bill to a certain degree.
As always, Dan, thank you.
There's a
Yeah, 1139 is in fact going to affect your very small, very old school. What the bill requires, if schools that are built before or had remediation before 2016, you have to do testing, and if you're above that 5 parts per billion, you have to replace fixtures or other things. Again, the positive thing about the federal government, their American Jobs Plan, if it passes, one of the things it does, as I understand, is not just go in and say, hey, let's take care of some fixtures. They're actually talking about using that billions of dollars to actually replace water lines. So my assumption, I don't know where the school is or how old it is, but my guess is the problem probably isn't just with your water fixture, your water fountain in the hallway. It's probably underneath the school, actually the water lines, because years and years and years ago, that was kind of the standard thing. And so hopefully you're going to be able to address that. And hopefully there's going to be enough funding for you. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but yeah, if it's a very old school and anything before 2016 is very old, at least in terms of the bill, you are going to have to do testing, and there's probably going to have to be remediation. Shouldn't make that assumption, but if it's a very old school, it's probably a pretty good chance. You probably have lead in your paint too. You're asking a technical question here about the putting a new well in, and will the engineer know about it? I don't know, but I would say if you're actually in process of doing that, it might be wise to actually talk to that engineer or somebody to maybe do some testing in your water lines. Again, if you're putting in a well and you've got lines from the well to the school that are actually lead contaminated, you might want to figure that out sooner than later. But I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure if that's the right answer. But just from a common sense standpoint, it seems like you should probably do some checking before you actually get that done. What else? Anything else? You know, Cal Brody thought that I was going to be able to provide all of the answers, even though session's done, but he thinks too highly of me. But it's unfortunate that we're not able to provide you all of the solid answers because the session's not yet done. But those of you who are going to the WASBO conference, TJ Kelly and Michelle Matakis are going to do their standard OSPI issue. It's going to be after the session. I'm going to join them to talk about some issues. And then we both have separate sessions that we're doing as well. So you'll be able to get some information at that point. We're also at WASA, we're putting together our end of session summary right now as well. Hoping to get that out as soon as possible. It'll probably be several weeks after session adjourns, but that will have all the comprehensive details of the budgets and all of these bills, answering Cal's questions that I can't answer today.
You get a solid A all the time, Dan.
Thanks, Cal.
So you do well.
You grade on the curve, don't you?
Well, thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate you coming and keeping us up to date on everything that's going on. So.
Yep. And everybody's got my contact information. If something comes up in the next couple of weeks or whenever, feel free to get a hold of me. Be more than happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break now until 10:15. So we'll see you back in 15.